At the reception, a woman welcomed Carter Harrison warmly, praising him and expressing excitement about his role at the United Fund following Bob Allen's departure. Carter responded graciously, acknowledging the challenge ahead. Preston Charlton, the bank president and search committee head who had recommended Harrison, beamed with pride and guided him around the room. The reception was attended by local business leaders, city officials, and representatives from charitable agencies supported by the United Fund. The atmosphere was friendly, enhanced by free drinks and high-quality hors d'oeuvres. Noticing a tall man chatting with the mayor, Carter inquired about him and the attractive woman with him. Charlton identified them as Father Mac McClanahan of St. Anne's Episcopal Church and Colleen O'Reilly, director of the Second Chance Women's Shelter and Father Mac's wife. Carter was surprised that a priest had a wife, but Charlton explained that Colleen kept her maiden name after marriage. When Carter asked about the importance of meeting Father McClanahan, Charlton described him as one of the most influential and respected people in town, known for his decency and trusted for advice beyond his parish. Carter, intrigued, agreed to meet them. Charlton led Carter to introduce him to the couple. After the introductions, Father Mac asked Carter Harrison if his experience at Procter & Gamble had been useful in his new role at the United Fund. Carter replied that while the private sector often focuses on short-term gains, its emphasis on measurable results has been valuable in the nonprofit sector, and he considers himself results-oriented. He then addressed Colleen O'Reilly, complimenting her on being an energetic and successful agency head, and proposed she lead one of his interagency task forces. Colleen, flattered, accepted the offer. Later, at the parsonage, Father Mac teased Colleen about her blush from the compliment. Colleen joked that her husband could learn to give compliments more often, to which Father Mac playfully replied that while he may not be the most debonair, he was teachable. They ended up playfully chasing each other to the bedroom. A few months later, Father Mac met with Bob Allen for lunch to catch up. Bob, now retired, expressed his regret about not meeting with people as often and feeling less valued. Father Mac reassured him that his old team still respected him and would seek his advice, though Bob suspected the new leadership might prefer to distance itself from the past. After one of his team members called with a question, Father Mac learned that Harrison had reprimanded her, insisting she check with him before contacting anyone else. Father Mac thought this was unhelpful, but Allen dismissed it, saying the new executive had his own agenda and that consulting him might hinder the transition. Father Mac assured Allen that he wasn't an old fart and acknowledged his extensive knowledge about the United Fund. They finished their lunch and decided to stay in touch. Reflecting on Allen's comments, Father Mac resolved to speak with Preston Charlton to get his view on Harrison's performance. Charlton's secretary, a member of Father Mac's congregation, promptly connected him to Preston. Preston reported that Harrison was performing exceptionally well, securing donor commitments even before the campaign started. Father Mac felt reassured, realizing his initial concerns were likely unfounded. A week later, Father Mac visited the United Fund office for a meeting with an account executive. He greeted Marge Terrell, a longtime bookkeeper, with a friendly wave, despite having never been formally introduced. He then discussed an upcoming audit on homelessness with Bill Simpson, an area of special interest for him, given St. Anne's ongoing efforts to support the homeless through clothing drives and a soup kitchen. After their discussion, Bill asked Father Mac to join him for coffee in the break room. Noting the unusual tone, Father Mac agreed. Once inside, Bill poured coffee for both of them, and after ensuring the room was clear, voiced his concerns. Bill revealed that he was considering leaving the United Fund due to dissatisfaction with the new boss, Harrison. According to Bill, Harrison was a micromanager who created a tense environment, with staff constantly fearful of his reprimands. Bill described Harrison as a petty tyrant with a short man syndrome, and mentioned that several colleagues were also contemplating resigning. Father Mac was alarmed by this news, and Bill's comparison of Harrison to a chihuahua only heightened his concern. As Bill glanced at his watch, he said he had to return to work, and Father Mac offered to walk with him, urging him not to make any hasty decisions. Leaving the break room, Father Mac was startled to encounter Harrison, who greeted him with an insincere cheerfulness. Harrison abruptly invited Father Mac to his office for the latest homeless data, dismissing any further conversation. Father Mac reluctantly followed Harrison to his office, where Harrison handed him a file and addressed him coolly, suggesting that if Father Mac had concerns, he should discuss them directly. Father Mac, feeling uncomfortable, assured Harrison he hadn't been checking up on him, but was simply interested in how the organization was faring under the new leadership. Harrison insisted that the organization was doing well and advised Father Mac to come to him directly for any future information. Father Mac left the office, puzzled by Harrison's prickly demeanor. When Colleen arrived home, Father Mac, still unsettled by the encounter, asked her opinion on Harrison. Colleen, who had worked with Harrison's task force, described him as a breath of fresh air compared to the previous, less effective regime. Although she acknowledged that Harrison was demanding and had stepped on some toes, she appreciated his effectiveness and decisiveness. Father Mac noted that Preston Charlton praised Harrison for his proactive approach with donors, to which Colleen agreed, confirming that Harrison's methods were indeed productive. They ended the conversation with a light-hearted remark about dinner and went to prepare the meal. That night, Father Mac was haunted by the same nightmare that had troubled him for a decade. He and his spotter, Rico Jimenez, were on overwatch duty in Baghdad. Their sniper team had become highly effective over the past 18 months, known for their exceptional teamwork. They were tasked with tracking down an enemy who had been causing significant casualties. Command decided to deploy their own team to combat this threat. Mac lay prone behind a rooftop chimney, his Barrett M107 hidden in the shadows, while Rico was stationed a block away, scanning for the enemy with their throat microphones and earbuds for communication. On the second day of their watch, Mac faced a difficult task. The city's irregular streets distorted sound, and they had been unable to spot the enemy. Amid the afternoon heat, Rico reported seeing a young girl no more than 10 years old was unable to move. Rico's voice grew urgent as he described the girl's worsening condition and the lack of help from bystanders. Determined to save her, Rico announced he was going down to assist her, despite Mac's pleas for him to wait for backup. As Rico moved to help, Mac searched the area for any threats, only to see Rico rushing to the girl's side. Just as Rico scooped her up, a second shot rang out. That night, Father Mac was tormented by a recurring nightmare. He and his spotter, Rico Jimenez, were on overwatch duty in Baghdad. Mac, lying behind a rooftop chimney, saw through his scope as Rico was shot in the thigh, blood spurting from the wound. Rico fell, trying to shield a young girl he had just rescued. Rico's agonized voice came through the earbuds, reporting that the bullet had hit bone and that he was trapped. Despite Mac's determination to rescue him, Rico warned him it was a trap, designed to lure Mac out and off him too. He urged Mac to stay put and not fall into the sniper's trap. Desperate and conflicted, Mac reluctantly agreed to follow Rico's advice. Rico, now calm despite his dire situation, asked Mac to pray with him. Though Mac was not religious, he followed Rico's instructions to recite a prayer. As Mac reached the line, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil," a third shot silenced Rico. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt, Mac searched the area in vain for enemy, cursing and crying as a fourth claimed the girl's life. Awakened by the nightmare, Mac sat up in bed, drenched in sweat and pale. Each repetition of the dream left him questioning his actions and feeling a deep sense of failure. He quietly left the room to sit in the living room until his trembling subsided, trying to find solace before returning to sleep. When Colleen woke up, she found the bed empty and discovered Mac sleeping on the couch. Though his nightmares were common, she hated that he was still tormented by his war experiences. She gently covered him with a blanket and prepared for her day. Selecting a silk suit from the closet, Colleen chose an outfit she had altered from a designer label she'd found at a thrift store. With a full day ahead at a United Fund task force meeting, she wanted to appear both professional and smart. Before leaving, she left Mac a note about her schedule and the possibility of running late. The task force meeting was held at a high-end hotel, a venue Carter Harrison preferred for its neutrality and quality service. Colleen, initially skeptical of the extravagance, appreciated the professional setting and the effective way Harrison managed the meeting. She admired his skill in steering the discussion and organizing tasks efficiently. As the meeting concluded, Harrison thanked each participant in the lobby. When he reached Colleen, he asked her to stay behind. He handed her a key to a breakout room and directed her to wait there while he finished with the others. Surprised, Colleen headed to room 514, where she found a table with papers and a laptop. She chose to wait on the love seat, her curiosity piqued by the unexpected request and Harrison's strong presence. After what felt like an eternity, Colleen heard the door unlock and saw Harrison enter. He nodded at her and, without a word, removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie before sitting on the edge of the bed. Colleen began to sit on the love seat, but Harrison instructed her to remain standing. Surprised, she complied. He then remarked on her impressive presence, noting that she had been the most intelligent and natural leader in the group. As she blushed at the praise, Harrison told her to hold her response. He walked around her, inspecting her as he spoke. Returning to his seat, he commented on her leadership skills and how her staff likely depended heavily on her for decisions, even minor ones. Colleen thought about how true that was, realizing how much she was leaned on. Harrison then revealed that he understood the burden of such responsibility and acknowledged her hidden desire for someone else to take over, to make decisions for her. His insight shocked her, as he had tapped into her unspoken wish to be relieved of constant responsibility and to follow someone else's lead for a change. As Colleen listened to Harrison, she felt entranced by his words, which tapped into desires she had long repressed. Her need to submit grew stronger, overwhelming her reservations. Harrison then directed her to remove her jacket, blouse, skirt, which she did under his stern gaze. Standing in only her underwear and pantyhose, she felt a mix of humiliation and arousal. Harrison's harsh treatment intensified her feelings as he tore her pantyhose. He then began to have act with her aggressively, with no tenderness or affection. The experience was raw and dominating, heightening her arousal despite the pain. Harrison's actions escalated as he spanked her, touched her, causing both pain and unexpected pleasure. Afterward, he briefly rested on her before dressing and leaving Colleen exhausted and immobilized. When Harrison returned, he was impeccably dressed and showed no sign of what had transpired. He informed her that the room was paid for and left with his laptop and papers, closing the door behind him. Colleen slowly got up and went to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror was unrecognizable. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her panties were visible through her torn pantyhose. As she tried to fix her appearance, she couldn't stop questioning herself about what had just happened. Once she managed to restore some semblance of normalcy, she gathered her things and checked the hallway. Seeing it was clear, she quickly left and took the elevator, where a maid gave her a peculiar look. Colleen wondered if she had overheard anything. Driving home, Colleen was lost in a daze, tormented by images of the hotel encounter. She felt deep guilt and self-loathing, particularly over her infidelity with Carter Harrison and the realization of how much she had enjoyed it. As she arrived home, the thought of facing Mac filled her with dread. She felt certain he would know what she had done. Panicking, she wiped her tears away before entering the house. Finding Mac had prepared dinner, she was overwhelmed and decided to lie about her health, claiming she was feeling unwell and needed to skip dinner to rest. Mac was worried about Colleen, but she reassured him and insisted he enjoy his dinner. Once he returned to the table, she retreated to the bedroom, undressed, and got into bed. When Mac checked on her later, she feigned sleep, though guilt kept her awake for hours. The next morning, Mac decided to let her rest, thinking it would be beneficial if she stayed home. He was surprised when Colleen called before noon saying she felt better and was going to work. Mac was pleased by her dedication. 2 days later, while Mac was working on his sermon, Mrs. Moore informed him that Carter Harrison was there to see him. Mac welcomed Harrison, who revealed he wasn't there for United Fund matters, but for a personal issue. Harrison inquired about the Episcopal Church's stance on confession, catching Mac off guard. Mac explained that while the church includes general confession in its services, private confession is rare and lacks the formal confessional structure found in Roman Catholicism. Harrison asked if confessions were strictly confidential. Mac confirmed that the seal of the confession meant that priests must keep confessions completely confidential, even after the confessor's death. Mac studied Harrison carefully, suspecting that he was there to make a confession. Harrison confirmed his intent and asked about the process, noting the absence of a confession box at St. Anne's. Mac explained that he preferred to keep confessions informal and private, typically holding them in his office to avoid disturbances. Harrison expressed his desire to confess adultery, revealing that he had engaged with a married woman. When Mac asked if he wished to name her, Harrison declined, indicating that Mac knew her. Although saddened by the involvement of someone he knew, Mac focused on Harrison's apparent lack of remorse, which irritated him. Harrison's casual attitude towards his actions prompted Mac to question his penitence. Mac advised Harrison to spend time reflecting on the gravity of his actions and their consequences, rather than performing traditional prayers. He suggested reading the General Confession of Sin from the Book of Common Prayer and revisiting the 10 Commandments, particularly the 7th. Harrison took the book from Father Mac, expressed relief, and left. Mac, returning to his desk, was puzzled by Harrison's visit. He had never seen Harrison at St. Anne's or any other church, and the request for confession was unexpected. Mac was concerned about the implications of Harrison's adultery, particularly its potential impact on his professional and personal circles, including the United Fund. He regretted that people often acted on impulse rather than reason. Meanwhile, Colleen struggled with persistent distractions at work, disturbed sleep, and troubling dreams. She felt a growing distance from Mac, which alarmed her given his supportive nature. Mac, reflecting on Harrison's casual attitude towards his confession, questioned the sincerity of his penitence. Frustrated and burdened by his role, Mac wished he could discuss his concerns with someone, but knew he had to keep them confidential. After a long day, Colleen nervously called Carter Harrison. When he answered, his smooth voice made her uneasy. Despite her fear, she asked to see him again, emphasizing her need. His laugh made her shudder. On weekends, Father Mac was always busy with last-minute preparations for Sunday services. So, when Colleen said she needed to work on Saturday afternoon, he was relieved, as it meant he wouldn't have to attend to her. When Colleen returned home that evening, Mac was alarmed by her appearance. She looked exhausted and was visibly in pain. She brushed off his concerns, attributing it to an early period, and went to bed early without eating. Mac decided to insist on a doctor's visit. On Sunday, Colleen skipped church, worsening Mac's worry. After services, he hurried home with her favorite fast food, relieved to find her feeling better. She attributed her discomfort to a short-term virus and dismissed the idea of seeing a doctor. Mac was reassured enough about Colleen's condition to attend the vestry meeting that evening, though he remained deeply worried. As he drove to the church, he recalled meeting Colleen during a difficult time in his life. After his military service and struggling with nightmares, he met her at Student Health, where she had offered comfort and support. Their connection had grown, leading to their marriage in the Divinity School chapel, and she had been his steadfast support ever since. On Monday, as Mac was finishing up at his desk, Mrs. Moore informed him that Carter Harrison had returned. Though preoccupied with Colleen, Mac asked her to bring Harrison in. When Harrison arrived, he confessed to committing adultery with the same woman again, showing no real remorse. Mac was disappointed and questioned Harrison's sincerity, emphasizing the need for genuine contrition and consideration for the woman and her family. Harrison brushed off Mac's concerns, claiming that discussing his actions had made him feel better. Mac, troubled by Harrison's visit, paced his office in frustration. He wondered if Harrison was mocking the church, testing him, or genuinely conflicted. Regardless, Mac felt he should focus on helping his congregation rather than dealing with Harrison's games. He was particularly concerned about the impact on the United Fund and debated whether to alert someone on the board about Harrison without breaching confidentiality. Meanwhile, Colleen struggled with guilt over her infidelity. Her attraction to Harrison and the ecstasy she experienced with him created a powerful internal conflict. Despite hating herself for cheating on Mac, she was torn by her desire for Harrison. Desperate to resist, she was still stunned when Harrison called, giving her a curt command to meet him at the Royal Sands Hotel that weekend. When Mac got home that evening, Colleen sensed he was preoccupied, but he brushed off her concerns, attributing it to a minor issue with a parishioner. She chose not to press further and instead mentioned plans to visit her sister for the weekend. Mac agreed, asking her to give Megan his best. Later, Mac struggled to sleep, worrying about his encounter with Carter Harrison. He resolved to visit the United Fund the next morning to investigate further, which helped him finally relax. Colleen also had trouble sleeping, fixated on Harrison and her compulsion to submit to him. She tried to rationalize her behavior as just a fling and convinced herself it was a temporary indulgence. Yet she felt guilty and hypocritical, aware of the excuses she often heard at the women's shelter. She also blamed the pressure of Mac's role and his overly considerate nature for her dissatisfaction, though she knew these traits were part of why she married him. What hurt Colleen the most was knowing how much Mac needed her. When she first met him, he was a veteran struggling with his past. Her most vivid memory was the night he broke down, recounting his best friend's death. Though shocked by his past, she was moved by his decision to attend divinity school and admired his resilience. Over time, she helped him rise from his struggles to become a respected community figure, though she knew he remained fragile. Her infidelity felt like a betrayal, risking not only her vows but Mac's well-being. The next morning, Colleen's pillowcase was damp from her tears. At St. Anne's, Father Mac scheduled a meeting with Bill Simpson at the United Fund, hoping to understand Carter Harrison's odd behavior. On his way, he encountered Harrison, who asked him to visit his office after the meeting. Father Mac reluctantly agreed to visit Carter Harrison after his meeting with Bill Simpson, though he preferred not to be seen by Harrison. After a brief discussion about homelessness, he went to Harrison's office. Inside, Harrison sat behind a high desk, looking smug. Without wasting time, Harrison confessed that he planned to commit adultery that weekend and wanted to confess in advance to avoid trouble later. Father Mac, infuriated by the mockery of the sacrament, told Harrison he would pray for him but could no longer serve as his confessor. He left, troubled and frustrated, wondering if Harrison might be mentally ill. On Saturday morning, Colleen seemed eager for her weekend getaway. Mac took a break from his routine to see her off and noticed she was preoccupied, which he chalked up to her excitement about seeing her sister. He told her to drive carefully and said he missed her, but she was too hurried to fully engage. As she drove away, he called out, "I love you," but she didn't hear. Back inside, Mac felt uneasy, and a troubling thought crossed his mind. Harrison mentioned taking his lover to the beach. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the idea gnawed at him, affecting his concentration on his Sunday sermon. He considered calling Colleen but was unsure how to ask without causing suspicion or conflict. Instead, he thought of calling Megan, Colleen's sister, to confirm Colleen's visit. However, he worried that asking Megan might reveal his doubts or make Megan seem complicit if she was covering for Colleen. In a panic, he finally decided to call Megan using a pretext, hoping to ease his anxiety. Megan answered the phone, relieved to hear from Mac, but her tone shifted when she realized he wasn't calling about Colleen's well-being. Mac reassured her that Colleen was fine and asked Megan to visit, as they hadn't seen her in a while. Megan mentioned she was leaving for New York in an hour and wouldn't return for a week, but hoped to visit next month. When she asked to speak with Colleen, Mac froze, realizing Colleen had lied about visiting her sister. The revelation struck Mac with the same anguish he felt during the war. He was overwhelmed by the betrayal and grief, realizing that Colleen's strength and love, which had been his anchor, were now gone. His initial pain quickly turned to anger, especially towards Carter Harrison, whom he now believed had been using Colleen to humiliate him. Mac's initial shock turned to intense suspicion about how Carter Harrison had entangled Colleen. He wondered if Harrison had seduced, drugged, or blackmailed her, or if Colleen had initiated the affair herself. The thought made him violently ill. After vomiting, Mac's thoughts cleared. He realized that Colleen had betrayed him repeatedly, based on Harrison's confessions and recent suspicious behavior. Harrison's motives went beyond mere lust. He seemed to be waging a personal war against Mac. Harrison's confessions had put Mac in a tough spot. Although Mac suspected Colleen's infidelity, he was hesitant to reveal Harrison's admissions, fearing he would break his vow of confidentiality. He grappled with whether Harrison's lack of genuine remorse justified breaking his oath, questioning if he had the right to determine the validity of the confession. Unable to resolve his dilemma, Mac decided to investigate on his own. With his limited budget, he searched online for beach resort hotels and, based on room rates, called the most expensive one. The Royal Sands confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Carter Harrison were checked in, but Mac chose not to speak to them, realizing it was too late. Feeling defeated, Mac slumped in his chair and realized he had neglected to ask God for help. He prayed for guidance, but found his faith empty and his prayers meaningless, feeling abandoned. He despaired, questioning his worth as a priest and feeling he had lost everything: his wife, marriage, and faith. In his sorrow, Mac recalled his time after Rico's death. He had withdrawn and obsessively studied the sniper's tactics that ended Rico. In the afternoon, Mac prepared for his ambush by bringing his M40 Magnum, a decoy stuffed with newspapers, and a spare uniform and helmet. He set up the decoy to draw the sniper out from the minaret's gallery and took his own position nearby. As the call to prayer played, Mac saw the barrel of the Magnum through his scope. He adjusted his aim and fired, causing an explosion of bricks. He continued to do it until he emptied 3 clips, ensuring the threat was neutralized. Although Command was unhappy with his actions, Mac was honorably discharged due to PTSD and awarded the Expert Rifleman Medal. Re-energized by the memory, Mac retrieved his Barrett from storage, cleaned it, and placed it back in the bedroom. Despite feeling he wasn't a good husband or priest, he was confident in handling his enemies. On Sunday, parishioners at St. Anne's noticed a marked shift in Father Mac's demeanor. His usually positive expression was replaced with a stern, foreboding look. During the general confession, he emphasized the solemnity of the words, "We have done those things that we ought not to have done, and we have left undone those things which we ought to have done, and there is no health in us." For his sermon, he focused on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt, surprising many with the dark tone. After the service, while congregants typically engaged with Father Mac, most hurriedly left that day. Preston Charlton approached the priest, concerned. He asked if everything was okay, noting Mac's uncharacteristic demeanor and the absence of his wife, Colleen. Father Mac assured him that Colleen was visiting her sister for the weekend and would return the next day. Preston offered his support, though he remained visibly concerned. After changing out of his robes, Father Mac was about to head home when he answered a call at the reception desk. Marge Terrell from the United Fund was on the line, requesting a meeting that afternoon. Although he was reluctant to see anyone, Mac agreed to meet her at 3 p.m. He could sense from her voice that she was upset and felt a duty to assist her despite not knowing her well. Father Mac met Marge Terrell outside the church and escorted her to his office. Once seated, he asked how he could help. Marge, on the verge of tears, expressed concern about troubling developments at the United Fund and handed him a stack of papers for review, mentioning she couldn't reach Bill Allen, who was on vacation. Later, after visiting elderly parishioners at a retirement home, Father Mac returned to his office to examine the documents. A text from Colleen read, "Having a great time with Megan, staying over till Monday morning. See you then, love you." Distraught, he fought the urge to smash his phone, left his office, and walked through the quiet streets near the United Fund, taking notes before heading home. On Monday morning, Colleen was running late from her beach trip, having slept poorly and feeling sore. She hoped the discomfort would keep her alert during the drive. When Colleen arrived at the hotel on Saturday, Carter instructed her to check in as Mrs. Harrison. The clerk handed her a key to the penthouse suite, and Colleen noted Carter's taste for luxury with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Upon entering the suite, Carter immediately ordered her to undress. Colleen saw a suitcase filled with bondage gear and felt a mix of fear and thrill. The night was a blur of intense and degrading activities. Carter's stamina was impressive, likely aided by Cialis. At one point, a loud knock interrupted them. Carter answered the door in boxers to find hotel management checking on Mrs. Harrison. Colleen, humiliated, had to present herself in a towel. She walked back to the bedroom, exposing her reddened rear to the manager, who left with a reminder to keep noise levels down. Later, Carter ordered room service, and Colleen had to hurriedly cover herself with sheets as the bellboy delivered their food. The same scene played out when the food was cleared away. After dinner, while watching a bondage film, Carter, inspired by the movie, used a ball gag on Colleen to avoid further interruptions. Despite her screams, the management didn't return. When Colleen woke on Sunday, she panicked at the thought of being late for church, but then remembered where she was and felt guilty. She tried to brush it aside as Carter announced they would spend the afternoon at the beach. He handed her a tiny white swimsuit with all modesty inserts removed. It clung to her body and would become transparent when wet. At the beach, Colleen felt a mix of embarrassment as she drew stares from men and disapproving looks from women. Carter enjoyed the attention, making her walk ahead to maximize the view. After returning to the suite, Carter took her to a fancy dinner where Colleen began to look forward to their return. However, once back in their room, Carter swiftly removed her dress, placed a ball into her mouth, and bound her to the bed face down. He then covered her with a sleep mask, leaving her helpless. After an intense session of arousal, Colleen was startled by a knock on the door. Although she couldn't see or hear well due to the sleep mask, she felt the bonds on her ankles loosen, leaving her restrained by her wrists. She then sensed a larger presence behind her, with large hands gripping her hips. When he finally collapsed on top of her, she passed out from the overwhelming sensations. Upon waking, she found herself on her side with her wrists freed. She felt the heavy stranger reposition her to straddle him. As she reached down, she was astonished by the size of his Johnson, which was so large her hands couldn't fully encircle it. As Carter and the big man began to move together, the initial awkwardness gave way to a powerful rhythm. Colleen felt overwhelmed, screaming in pleasure until all three collapsed in exhaustion. When she woke up, sunlight filled the room, and the big man was gone. Carter, freshly showered and dressed, told her flatly, "Next time there will be 5 men." Colleen shuddered at the thought. After Carter left, Colleen quickly packed her things, ran a comb through her hair, and headed for the lobby. Carter had already settled the bill, so she just had to deal with the desk clerk's lingering stare, which she realized was due to her not wearing any underwear. Panicked, she drove to a Walmart and rushed to the women's wear section to buy a white bra and a 3-pack of panties. In the parking lot, she awkwardly changed into them while sitting in her car, drawing curious glances from a teenage boy nearby. As she drove, a wave of guilt washed over her. The past weekend felt like a bizarre dream. Had she really betrayed her husband with such debauchery? Tears welled up as she thought about Mac and the shame he would feel if he knew. She vowed to be a better wife and never see Carter again, but the memory of Carter's promises made her shiver. Conflicted, she questioned why she desired such behavior despite loving her husband. She blamed Carter for tempting her, but deep down she knew she was also at fault. She hadn't been forced. She had chosen to stay and partake in what he offered. As Colleen drove through the outskirts of the city, she pushed her turbulent thoughts aside, focusing on the urgent tasks awaiting her at the office. Arriving at the women's shelter, she was quickly overwhelmed by paperwork and phone calls, losing track of time. During a brief lunch break at her desk, she realized she hadn't called Mac. She dialed the church office and reached Mrs. Moore, who informed her that Mac was at a meeting and might stay overnight at the hospital for a visitation. There was no other message. Colleen felt frustrated and uneasy about the delay in reconnecting with Mac. The thought of him possibly avoiding her or being upset gnawed at her, though she dismissed the idea of him knowing about her weekend as too awful to consider. Returning home late, she found the parish house dark and Mac's car missing. With relief, she unpacked her suitcase, ran a load of laundry, and took a long shower to wash away the lingering discomfort from the hotel. While changing, she noticed a long black bag in the corner of the bedroom. Realizing it contained Mac's old Magnum, which had been stored in the attic, she recoiled. The sight of it brought back troubling memories of Mac's dark days after returning from West Asia, and made her feel uneasy. Nervously, Colleen tried calling Mac's cell phone but only reached his voicemail. Remembering he turned his phone off at the hospital, she felt uneasy and couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. The next morning, Father Mac found a note from Mrs. Moore about Colleen's call and set it aside, deciding to address it later. Marge Terrell then arrived with additional papers, which made him uneasy. He quickly called Preston Charlton to arrange a meeting and left his office with a grim expression. Carter Harrison, annoyed by a summons from Preston Charlton, complained about the inconvenience as he drove to the bank. Spotting Father Mac leaving the bank, he sneered, recalling their recent encounter. At the bank, Charlton informed Carter, "The trustees have unanimously decided to remove you as executive director of the United Fund, effective immediately," ignoring Carter's handshake. Harrison was outraged as he confronted Charlton, demanding to know what was going on. Charlton calmly presented a set of expense reports detailing numerous unauthorized personal purchases, inappropriate expenditures, and overspending beyond the United Fund's limits. Harrison hastily reviewed the papers, tearing them apart and dismissing the issue as trivial. He argued that his increased donations and higher revenues for the fund more than justified any overspending and claimed he was worth more than his salary. Charlton, filled with anger and contempt, explained that Harrison had no right to decide what was acceptable with donor money. The funds were intended for charitable use, not for Harrison's personal indulgences or vacations. Charlton also noted that Harrison's attempt to reimburse a personal trip as a business expense was deceitful, as the hotel confirmed there was no conference. Harrison argued that the high-pressure nature of his job entitled him to some relaxation at the fund's expense, likening it to investing. He also threatened legal action, stating that his contract would protect him from termination and that his attorney would sue for damages and restraining orders. Charlton acknowledged that while Harrison could pursue legal action, the United Fund would ultimately prevail and pursue both civil and criminal charges. He offered a deal. If Harrison admitted to misusing funds and agreed to restitution, he could resign quietly, avoiding charges. Charlton presented Harrison with a legal document, advising him to sign it as the best deal he could get. Harrison, fuming, tucked the document into his coat jacket and said he would show it to his attorney, dismissing it with contempt. Charlton, puzzled, noted that there seemed to be more to Harrison's anger and speculated that it might involve Father McClanahan. Harrison erupted with excitement, accusing McClanahan of breaking his priestly vows by revealing a confession. He claimed that McClanahan had betrayed him and that he intended to expose the priest and ruin his reputation. Charlton, confused, asked for clarification. Harrison revealed that he had confessed an affair to McClanahan, but hadn't named the other person. He insisted that McClanahan had broken his vow of secrecy once he realized the affair was with his own wife. Charlton, in disbelief, defended Colleen, asserting she would never cheat on Mac. Harrison taunted Charlton with explicit details about the affair, shocking him. Charlton, now alarmed, urgently advised Harrison to sign the document and leave town immediately, warning him that McClanahan's military background made him dangerous. Harrison dismissed Charlton's warnings about Father McClanahan's strength and dedication, insisting he was not afraid of either the priest or the board of trustees. He stormed out of Charlton's office, slamming the door behind him. Charlton, worried, tried calling McClanahan in St. Anne's but could not reach him, repeatedly urging him not to do anything rash. Meanwhile, Colleen was at her computer when Harrison burst into her office, furious and shouting about McClanahan breaking the seal of confession and revealing Harrison's secrets to Preston Charlton. Colleen, trying to manage the situation amid the curious stares of her colleagues, asked Harrison why he had confessed in the first place. Harrison explained he wanted to undermine McClanahan's public image, boasting about how he had mocked the priest during the confession. Colleen, horrified, demanded to know if Harrison had revealed their affair. Outside, her co-workers reacted with shock, but Colleen focused solely on Harrison's response. Harrison smirked as he revealed he had confessed to McClanahan about their affair, and even taunted him by mentioning their beach trip. He gloated about making McClanahan a loser and planned to ruin him further. Colleen, horrified, warned that McClanahan was a highly skilled sniper with a deadly record, not just a Marine Corps chaplain. She explained that McClanahan had brought Magnum down from the attic, a powerful tool capable of extreme damage. Desperate, Colleen pleaded with Harrison to leave town immediately, fearing for his safety. Harrison, suspicious, questioned her motives, assuming her concern was insincere. With tears in her eyes, Colleen admitted that, despite her feelings for Harrison, she was deeply concerned for McClanahan's well-being. She recounted how McClanahan had struggled profoundly after losing someone he loved, and did not want to see him suffer again. Harrison's uncertainty grew as he hesitated twice before finally dismissing Colleen's warnings as nonsense. He was determined to expose McClanahan's flaws and stormed out of her office, heading for his car. As he drove back to the United Fund, his thoughts were a mix of elation at having McClanahan's wife and anger at the priest for disclosing his confession. Though he was eager to let everyone know how he had humiliated McClanahan, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the priest might be following him. Arriving at the United Fund, Harrison noticed groups of employees gathered outside and in the lobby, but he ignored them and rushed to his office. To his shock, he found the door wide open, despite being sure he had closed it. Inside, his office was in disarray. Dust filled the air, papers were scattered, and his desk was splintered. His executive chair was overturned with a large ragged hole punched through the back. He then saw that the cinderblock wall behind his desk was shattered. As he stood there in stunned disbelief, the receptionist approached nervously and told him that McClanahan had left a package for him. The priest had asked her to make sure Harrison received it immediately, saying it was urgent. Harrison took the package from the receptionist and opened it cautiously. Inside, he found a large bullet, the biggest he had ever seen. Numbly, he hefted it, wondering if it was truly a rifle shell. He quickly returned it to the package and noticed a torn page from the Bible with the words, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," highlighted. Recalling Colleen's warning about McClanahan's skills, Harrison's fear surged as he imagined the priest could be targeting him from nearby buildings. Panicked, he moved away from the window and noticed the hole in the wall. Trembling, he dropped to the floor, pulled out the document Charlton had given him, signed it hastily, and left it on the dusty carpet. He dashed out of his office, shouting to the employees, "I signed it! Tell him not to shoot! I signed it!" He then sped to his car and drove away towards the interstate. After Harrison left, Colleen, still in shock, sat at her desk, drying her tears. Gathering herself, she grabbed her purse and told a coworker she was leaving. When asked if she would return, she replied bleakly, "I doubt it." Colleen drove quickly to St. Anne's, desperate to find Mac. When she arrived, she rushed to his office, only to find it empty. Mrs. Moore, alarmed by Colleen's distressed state, said she hadn't seen Mac since early that morning. Colleen, frustrated and worried, asked Mrs. Moore to have Mac call her immediately and not to do anything rash. As she got into her car, Colleen broke down in tears, overwhelmed by despair. She wished it was all a nightmare. Driving home, she hoped Mac would be there, but the driveway was empty. Feeling deeply depressed, she went inside and noticed her red, swollen eyes in the mirror. In the bathroom, she tried to calm herself with cold water, only to discover with horror that the Magnum bag she had seen earlier was now missing. Colleen sank onto the bed, crying uncontrollably, tormented by guilt over possibly turning Mac back into a killer. She waited anxiously in the darkened bedroom until she heard a car in the driveway. When Mac walked in, the heavy tool slung over his shoulder, Colleen fearfully asked, "Did you off him?" "I intended to do more," he said, but I ended up just scaring him half to death. It seems to have worked. Preston called me not long ago from the United Fund office. The staff told him that Harrison left in a hurry, like he was running from something. They found his resignation letter and confession in his office. I don't think we'll have to deal with Carter Harrison again. Colleen gradually dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by a wave of relief. But then she looked up at Mac, her eyes now filled with new fear. "Are you going to off me?" she asked. Quickly, he set his tool aside. "No, Colleen," he said, clearly surprised. "Of course not. I could never hurt you. Not even after what I did? Carter told me he confessed everything to you." Mac shook his head firmly. "I can't reveal anything from a confession, but I figured out what you had done myself. Your behavior over the last few weeks made me suspicious. When I called Megan after you left on Saturday, I learned you had lied to me about your plans. I took a chance and called the Royal Sands. They told me Mr. and Mrs. Harrison had checked in. Later, Carter's expense account showed he was there. And when I visited the house this morning, I found the hotel's complimentary comb, proving you were there too." Colleen then bowed her head in shame. "I'm so sorry, Mac. I regret it deeply. You don't even know the half of it. It's far worse than just cheating on you. I did terrible things with him, and he did even worse things to me. I'm so ashamed." Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at him. "I wish you would end me. I deserve to die." The anguish in his voice was evident. "Why, Colleen? Why did you do this? What did I do wrong?" She started to cry harder. "Oh, Mac, none of this is your fault. Somehow Carter revealed a side of me I didn't know existed. He controlled me and used me, and I loved it. It was like an obsession. Once I tried it, I was obsessed." She gazed at him with desperate eyes. "I've seen many alcoholics and pills obsessed in my work, and I was just like them. All I wanted was another fix, no matter who got hurt." He knelt beside her. "I understand temptation, Colleen. I've faced it too, especially recently," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "Do you think you could ever love me again, even after everything?" He lifted her to her feet. "I will always love you, Colleen." She hugged him tightly, her hope rekindled. "Can you forgive me? I know I've hurt you deeply, but I'll do everything to be the wife you deserve. Please, forgive me." He met her gaze solemnly. "I do forgive you, Colleen." She embraced him again, but he didn't respond. "What's wrong, Mac?" His eyes were filled with pain. "I'll always love you, but I can't stay married to you." "Why not?" she asked. "You said you forgave me." "I forgive you, but I can't forget what you've done. I've lost my faith in you." Her tears flowed harder. "Rico was different," he said. "I always trusted him. Even as he lay dying, he thought of me." He looked at her with despair. "You were my strength, Colleen, but now I can't trust you. I have to learn to live without you." She collapsed on the floor, and this time he left her there. When Preston Charlton entered the church office the next day, Mac was sorting through files. Preston asked softly, "How did it go with Colleen?" Mac looked up, troubled. "She's heading to her sister's today and plans to stay there until she finds a new place." "I'm really sorry, Mac," Preston said. "I never expected things to turn out like this." Mac averted his gaze and continued working. "What are you doing?" Preston asked. "I'm leaving St. Anne's," Mac replied. "I'm quitting the priesthood." Charlton was shocked. "Mac, you can't do that. The people here need you." "They need someone better than me," Mac insisted. "I wasn't a good husband or priest. I failed to protect Colleen from Carter Harrison and didn't act on the warning signs with the United Fund." "You can't blame yourself," Preston said. "Harrison deceived us all, and everyone faces temptation. Colleen isn't the first." Mac smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I still feel like I should have done more. I came close to hurting someone and damaged the office. What kind of priest is that?" Preston smiled back. "Don't worry about the office. You got Harrison's confession and resignation. The board might even give you a medal for handling him, not a bill for damages." Mac's expression grew serious. "No one could blame you for your anger at Harrison," Preston said. Mac replied bitterly. "That's the worst part, Preston. I feel abandoned by God and lost my faith. I sought his help when I discovered Colleen's betrayal, but felt nothing. Where was he when I needed him?" He showed Charlton his sermon notes. "Here's my sermon on Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember how God sent an angel to rescue Lot? Where was my angel?" In a hushed tone, Mac admitted, "I almost ended that man. If Marge Terrell hadn't brought those expense accounts to me, I would have shot him." Charlton looked puzzled. "What did you say, Father Mac?" Mac, realizing his words, paused in surprise. "I said I would have ended Harrison if Marge hadn't shown up," he said thoughtfully. After a moment, Mac began organizing his desk. Maybe this is where I belong after all, he said quietly.